stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the MSP Chat Podcast, your weekly visit with two talking heads talking to you about the strategies, services, and success tips you need to make it big in managed services. My name is Rich Freeman. I am tongue-tied. I'm also the Chief Content Officer at Channel Master, the organization responsible for this podcast. I am with you this week, as I am every week, by your other co-host, our Chief Strategy Officer at Channel Mastered, Eric Simpson. Eric, how goes it?
It goes fantastic, Rich. How are you doing?
Other than tongue-tied, I am doing great.
Well, let's give you an opportunity to loosen up that tongue a little bit and dive into the top story, an awesome spotlight interview, and maybe a little humor.
Absolutely. And about that spotlight interview, do stick around, folks, because our guest this week, and we're really excited about it, is Prakash Panjwani. He is the CEO of WatchGuard, and we're going to have a very interesting conversation with him about that company and its strategy, but also what that strategy says about the larger opportunity for MSPs and security right now. So stick around. That is coming up. But right now, let us dive into the story of the week. And Eric, this is something that I'm going to be writing about in Channelholic, which is my blog. In fact, I'm working on that today as we record this. We've spoken with folks in the audience on recent episodes of the podcast a little bit about new or emerging opportunities for MSPs. And I want to talk about one that has been on my mind a little bit, based on some things that I've seen, heard just within the last week or two. So first of all, I got a press release from IDC, the analyst organization. They said that global spending on environmental, social, and governance business services, so environmental, social, governance, ESG, and I'm going to be focusing in here specifically on the environmental piece of that. That the social is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Governance is about how you kind of run the business. But let's zero in here on the environmental sustainability piece of ESG. Global spending on ESG business services is going to grow at a 14.9% compound annual growth rate from $37.7 billion this year to nearly $65 billion in 2027, turning ESG into, according to IDC, quote, one of the fastest growing spaces in the business world, end quote. I also got, just last week, I got some data from TD SYNNEX. They have this big, interesting research study they just put out, and there's some ESG data in there. And it says that a third of IT providers in North America right now are providing ESG reporting and accreditation services. That number actually surprised me a little bit. This is not a market in its infancy. 1 out of 3 IT providers in North America already doing at least some ESG. Now, with that said, 55%, I had a conversation with a couple of different analysts at Canalys this week, Rachel Brindley and I'm looking for her name here, Elsa Nightingale. Very, very interesting conversation with them. Canalys has done some research on this as well. And in North America, 55% of the channel partners they surveyed aren't tracking sustainability KPIs. But that means 45% are. So again, another indication, this is not something no one is doing yet. And in fact, if you're not doing it or thinking about doing it yet, you might even be just a little bit late. And it is something that you need to be thinking about. There are more and more state level regulations here in the US that require this kind of thing. This is relatively new to me, but in the European Union, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive begins going into effect and being enforced in January of 2024. It's a European Union regulation about ESG, but it's a little bit like GDPR. Eric, this is going to have implications for businesses in the US that have operations or do some business in the EU. So this will probably over time affect some of your clients. So where is the opportunity for MSPs in our audience around ESG? Well, the obvious one, the most familiar one, is around what's sometimes called the circular economy or hardware recycling. There is recent data I've seen indicating that SMBs dump 1/3 of the hardware that they're replacing in any given refresh cycle into a landfill somewhere. all of the hardware that you help your SMB clients replace should be refurbished, recycled, and there are all sorts of programs. Ingram Micro, TD Synnex just announced a program along these lines of its own. Dell, HP, Cisco, a year and a half ago announced a program. I just recently found out that 740 Cisco partners have gotten certified to participate in that program. So there are all sorts of resources out there that will take that hardware off of your customers' hands for you, do it at their expense. It's not going to cost you or the customer anything. And you can actually recover some of the value of that hardware. If you're 3 to 5 years into the life cycle of that asset, it might still have 20% of its original purchase price left in value, and you and or your customer can take advantage of that. But there is also an emerging services opportunity, Eric, and it's in that kind of energy area. So 35%, this is according to Canalys, 35% of channel partners worldwide are doing some kind of channel assessment service, energy assessment service for their customers right now, where they go in, they look at the power consumption, say, of servers in the server closet or in the data center if they have one. It might be power consumption by the PCs if they're using those. What are you consuming now? What would you be consuming if you upgraded? That kind of helps people understand where they're going to save money, and it also kind of helps them reach their ESG targets. There's also ongoing monitoring and management of energy consumption by these partners. In addition to managing their IT infrastructure, you can kind of help them make sure, and there's software that does this kind of thing. You can keep an eye on, are the lights on? Should they be on? It's overnight. Nobody's in the office. All sorts of different functions like that, where you can actually go to them and show you, for X additional dollars per month, I can save you Y dollars on energy consumption and help you towards your ESG goals. And then also this ties in really neatly to the cloud computing story, because desktop as a service, Windows 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, this is actually a very environmentally sustainable and responsible technology compared to on-prem servers. And so you can use that as one of the ways that you sell a desktop as a service solution to your end user customers. And this is something that's going to be a selling point for them, along with all the other things that make that kind of a service worth buying into as well for them. So, something to have on your radar if you're an MSP, Eric, if you're not thinking about ESG, if you're not talking to your customers about their ESG plans, here's something that you can do now while there is still time to get into this opportunity. Cement your position as a trusted advisor to that customer, and potentially make a little extra money along the way.
Yeah, I really have been watching this for a little bit now, Rich. And yes, it certainly seems that the EU is a little bit further ahead than the US is in this area. In fact, there's, different factions that are, completely bought in, and then there are different factions that are like, why should we take a look at it? I like to look at this as being on the right side of history. Like, what can we do to save energy? What can we do to stop, cluttering up our landfills? What can we do to, promote just being good stewards of the environment and in qualifying our clients and raising their awareness, of the importance of this. And I'm not saying, we start a movement and all that, but it's certainly a way to qualify prospects differently and to show a different strategic perspective to existing clients when you tie that back into, energy savings, right? We're doing it for the right reasons, but what are the true benefits to get a client to say, okay, yes, I should probably replace this equipment because it is consuming so much more power, energy, cooling, etc. And it's probably not running as efficiently and productively as new equipment would. And oh, by the way, I can get a little bit of a benefit from entering into this program that you're kind of guiding me through, right? And it does help with the conversation, like you said, of moving more towards the cloud. Like, how many do we still need those 16 servers in the closet? I don't know if we do anymore, right? But having those conversations really distinguishes the value of the relationship between the MSP and their client to become much more strategic in nature. And all of these organizations and distributors and vendors that you mentioned, Rich, and many more, have calculators available for partners to go in and do these assessments and these analyses very, very easily, and then to apply whatever, what the trade-in value would be if you entered into our recycling program and all this other stuff. So you can actually have, and some of them I've seen produce a very nice proposal and a report, and make it easy for you to get that client to say, yes, let's go ahead and do that, right? Hey, it's getting toward the end of the year. Wouldn't you rather invest in replacing some of the stuff rather than, giving it away to Uncle Sam? What really struck me, though, Rich, on top of all of this and what I've been watching, is that compound annual growth rate that you mentioned. What was it again? 14 point something percent?
It is 14.9%.
14.9%. And I may be off on this, but I believe that is a higher CAGR than managed services right now, the growth for managed services. I could be wrong on that. I hope I don't have those numbers flipped, but it seems to me that's an impressive CAGR number. So it proves that there is opportunity here. And it again is another distinguishing factor that can help you grow your relationship with your clients in a much more strategic and long-term fashion when you're bringing these types of conversations to the conference room table during your QBRs.
Yeah. And about that compound annual growth rate, I'm pretty sure it is higher than the managed services equivalent. I think it's higher than the cybersecurity equivalent. This is why IDC says this is the fastest growing business space out there right now. One or two other quick notes before we move on. First of all, excellent point about the calculators that are out there right now. These energy assessment services, energy monitoring and management services, the bar to entry there is actually not that high. Don't be intimidated by the fact that I'm not an energy partner. You can actually get in there relatively quickly. Another thing to know that the Canalys analyst told me about is banks increasingly are checking when they're assessing someone for a loan. They're looking to see, do you have an ESG program in place? Because if you don't, you could be subject to regulatory fines, and that makes you a bigger risk. So interest rates sometimes are higher for companies that aren't thinking about this. Here's another bit of strategic advice that you can share with your clients. And then last but not least, we're talking about this, and rightly so, in terms of the end user and what you're doing for your client. But think about ESG goals and programs in terms of your business as well, if you are an MSP, because the Canalys analyst also said to me, private equity companies are getting more and more reluctant to acquire businesses that don't have an ESG program in place. Now, you may have no plans to sell to private equity ever, in which case you don't need to worry about that. But if you want to have the option of potentially selling to private equity as part of your exit plan, keep in mind, if you're not taking ESG seriously in your own house, this could be an obstacle for you down the road. Now, Eric, one way to kind of rein in that energy consumption and pursue your ESG goals is to reduce infrastructure sprawl. Your tip of the week, which we're moving on to right now, has to do with sprawl as well.
That's right, Rich. And it's one of the biggest challenges that MSPs that we work